He fell in love with her letters before he ever saw her face. For 2 years she wrote to him about sunlight on water, and the sound the wind makes through autumn oaks, and the way loneliness feels different in spring than it does in winter. Her words were the most beautiful things he had ever read. When she finally arrived at his door, he understood why she had never once described what she looked like. The first letter arrived on a Thursday in March, which was the kind of day that begins gray and stays gray and offers nothing to a man on a ranch except work and the promise of more work tomorrow. It was tucked between a feed bill and a land tax notice. Addressed in a handwriting so precise it looked like it had been drawn rather than written, each letter formed with the particular care of someone who treats words as objects worth making well. Wayland Holt turned it over twice. He did not recognize the name. The return address was a town he had never heard of, somewhere in the Northern Territories. He almost threw it out. He was not in the habit of receiving letters from strangers, or from anyone else for that matter. He had lived alone on the ranch 11 years, since his parents died in the same winter fever that had emptied half the valley south of the Graywater and left him, at 23, the sole owner of 600 acres of good grass and bad silence. In those 11 years, the mail had brought him nothing but bills and notices and the occasional almanac he had not ordered, and he had stopped thinking of the mailbox as a place where anything interesting could arrive. He opened it because there was nothing else to do that evening, and the stove was warm and the coffee was fresh. And a man who lives alone on a ranch in the valley south of the Graywater, where the burned plains still heal from the clan wars and the nearest neighbor is a 40-minute ride, develops a relationship with boredom that makes him willing to try almost anything that is not another evening of staring at the same 4 walls. Dear Mr. Holt, I hope this letter finds you in good health and good weather, though I am told the weather in your valley is rarely good and the health depends on the season. I found your name in a homesteader's registry. I am told you ranch alone in the valley south of the Graywater and that the land there is beautiful. I have never seen that part of the country. I write to you because I have no one to write to, and I have been told that loneliness shared between strangers is sometimes lighter than loneliness carried alone. I do not expect a reply. If one comes, I will be glad. If not, I wish you well. Sincerely, Senna. He read it 3 times. Then he set it on the table and stared at it while his coffee went cold. He had not received a personal letter in 11 years. He had not had a conversation that lasted longer than a supply order in months. And this stranger, this Senna, had written to him with a directness and a warmth that made the cabin feel smaller and more populated than it had in years. He went to bed intending to throw it out in the morning. Sleep came slowly, and when it came he dreamed about a voice he had never heard reading words he had just read, and the voice was warm. In the morning, he found himself at the table with a pencil and a piece of rough paper, writing a reply he had not planned to write, in a handwriting that was not as precise as hers, because nothing about him was as precise as her, but he did not know that yet. If this story finds you somewhere warm tonight, do one small thing for me. Write in the comments which town the winter finds you in. Now, back to the ranch. Dear Senna, the land here is not beautiful. It is hard and dry, and the wind never stops. But the sunsets are the finest I have ever seen, and on still mornings the valley fills with mist and the cattle stand in it like ghosts, and even a man who has given up on beauty has to stop and look. I do not know why I am writing this to a stranger. I suppose because you asked. Wayland. She wrote back within a week. Her letters were unlike anything he had encountered. She wrote the way some people paint, not to report facts but to make a reader see the world the way she saw it. She described the sound of rain on a tin roof as the sky trying to drum a rhythm it keeps forgetting. She described morning frost as the night leaving its fingerprints on everything it touched before it left. She described the color of autumn as the year putting on its best clothes before it dies. She told him about a creek near her home that froze in patterns every winter, elaborate geometric shapes that appeared overnight and vanished by noon. And she had spent years studying the patterns and sketching them in a notebook, and she believed the ice was trying to write something, a message left by the cold for anyone patient enough to read it. But she had not yet learned the alphabet. He laughed at that. Sitting alone at his kitchen table at 9 in the evening, with a letter in one hand and cold coffee in the other. He had not laughed in his cabin in a long time, months maybe, and the sound startled him, a short rough bark that echoed off the walls and made the dog lift its head from the rug. Then he laughed at having been startled, and the cabin felt different after, as if laughter had rearranged the furniture into a configuration that allowed for the possibility of more laughter later. The letters came every 2 weeks, regular as tides. He began to anticipate them the way a man anticipates weather, watching the road on Thursdays, finding excuses to check the mailbox twice. The postmaster noticed. "You got a sweetheart, Holt?" "Just a correspondent." The postmaster grinned. That is what they all say. He learned things about her, not facts. Not the ordinary biographical details that people exchange when they are getting to know each other, but something deeper. He learned the shape of her mind. She thought in metaphors. She saw connections between things that had no business being connected, the way tree roots and river systems follow the same branching pattern, the way smoke rises in the same spiral as water drains, the way a person building a fence is also building a definition of the word home, one post at a time, each one a decision about what belongs inside and what stays out. She was well read in a way that did not make him feel small for not being. She referenced books he had never heard of, and then described them in a way that made him want to find them. Not because she told him to, but because she made the books sound like places worth visiting, and he had been living in the same place for 11 years, and the idea of visiting anywhere, even in a book, felt like oxygen. She was funny in a quiet way, the humor not in jokes but in the angle she held the world at, slightly tilted, so that familiar things looked unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things looked like they had been there all along. He told her things. That surprised him more than anything else in the correspondence, because Waylon Holt was not a man who told things. He was a man who kept things, stored them in the same internal room where he kept grief and memories and the particular kind of loneliness that does not announce itself but sits in the corner like a piece of furniture you have stopped noticing. He told her about his parents, about his mother who sang while she cooked and his father who never sang but always listened, about the fever that took them both in the same week, 2 days apart, as if neither one was willing to stay long without the other, about the 11 years of silence that followed, the slow narrowing of the world until the ranch was not a home but a container, holding him in place because he had no reason to be anywhere else. He told her that the hardest part of living alone was not the work or the cold or the absence of company. The hardest part was that he had stopped noticing things. The sunsets he mentioned in his first letter, he had stopped seeing them years ago. He walked past them the way a man walks past a painting that has hung in the same hallway so long it has become invisible. Her letters made him see them again. She had given him back his own eyes, and she had done it from a town he had never visited using nothing but a pencil and the particular talent of noticing beauty in ordinary things and refusing to let it pass without remark. "You describe the world so well," he wrote, "that I have started looking at it more carefully, in case you ask about it." She never described herself. He noticed it after 6 months, the way you notice that a painting on a wall has no frame. Not immediately, but with a growing awareness that something is missing from the edges. She described everything else with such vivid precision that the absence of self-description became its own kind of presence. A shadow in the shape of a woman standing in the middle of the most detailed landscape he had ever read. She wrote about everything: the creek, the weather, the light, the books she read, the herbs she grew, the sound of owls at night. She wrote about her hands once, how they looked in firelight, the shadows between the fingers. But she never said what she looked like. She never mentioned her age, her hair, her eyes. The omission was so consistent it began to feel deliberate, a door she had chosen not to open, and he respected it the way he respected all the spaces she left in her letters, because the spaces were as eloquent as the words. "A year and a half in," he asked. "I have read your letters so many times the paper is wearing thin. I know how you think, what you notice, what makes you laugh, what keeps you awake at night. But I do not know what you look like. You have never said." Her reply came a week later, shorter than usual, and he could feel the care in every word. The way a person writes, when they are choosing each sentence like a step across uncertain ground. "I have not described my face because I want you to see me the way you see me now. Through my words. There are things about my appearance that the world has opinions about. Strong opinions. And those opinions are louder than anything I could write. If you saw me first, you would read my letters differently. The same words would mean different things. And I am not ready for that. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. I hope you can understand." He sat with that answer for 3 days. He read it in the morning with coffee. He read it in the evening by the stove. He read it in bed with the lamp low, and each time he read it, he understood a little more and was troubled a little less. Because whatever she was hiding it for a reason that mattered to her, and he had learned enough about this woman to know that her reasons were always worth respecting. He understood something without fully grasping it. She was hiding something about her appearance, something she believed would change how he felt about her words. A scar, maybe a disfigurement, something the world had taught her to be ashamed of. He picked up the pencil. "Whatever you look like," he wrote, and he crossed out 3 versions of the sentence before he got to the one that felt right. "The woman who wrote these letters is the person I want to know. Appearance does not change words, and your words are the most honest things I have ever read." He meant every syllable. He had no idea how deeply that belief was about to be tested. 2 years after the first letter, she wrote to say she was coming. "I have saved enough for the journey. I will arrive on the first Thursday of October. If you do not want me to come, write and tell me. If no letter comes, I will take the road south and find your valley and your gate." He did not write to stop her. He read the letter 4 times. Then he cleaned the cabin with the focused intensity of a man who has just realized that the abstract is about to become concrete, and that the woman who has existed for 2 years as handwriting and ideas and the particular way she described the color of autumn is about to exist as a person standing on his porch, and his porch has not been swept in 3 months. He mended the fence. He bought a set of proper cups from the store in town, because a man who has been drinking from the same cracked mug for 11 years does not offer a woman like Senna coffee from a cracked mug. He cut his hair, which needed it badly, and trimmed his beard, which needed it worse, and he stood in front of the small mirror in the washroom and looked at a man he barely recognized. He was 34 years old and looked 40. His eyes were blue and tired. His hands were calloused beyond repair. He was wearing a clean shirt for the first time in weeks. And he was nervous. He had not been nervous about anything in 11 years, and the nervousness felt foreign and wonderful, like a language he had once spoken and forgotten. The first Thursday of October was cold and bright. He spent the morning on the porch, watching the road, his stomach doing things he had not felt since he was 17. Around noon, a figure appeared on the road, walking, no horse, carrying a traveling bag. He stood. His heart was in his throat. The figure drew closer, and the details began to resolve, the way a picture comes into focus, and each detail that arrived brought the next one with it, and each one landed like a stone dropped into still water. She was tall, taller than he expected, broad through the shoulder. She walked with the unhurried stride of someone who has traveled a long distance and is not in a rush to finish the last 100 yards because the last 100 yards are the ones that matter. And her skin was green. She stopped at the gate. She set her bag down on the road with the careful precision of a woman who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind and is now discovering that reality does not follow rehearsal. She stood there, straight-backed, chin level, the way a person stands when they have decided to be brave about a thing that terrifies them. And she looked at him across the fence with eyes that were amber and bright, and held every word she had written to him in 2 years of letters. She was an orc. She was an orc. The word arrived in his mind like a stone dropped into a well, and the well was very deep, and the stone fell a long time before it hit the water. She was an orc, and she had written to him about sunlight on water and the sound the wind makes through autumn oaks and ice trying to write on a creek, and she had made him laugh in an empty cabin and see sunsets he had stopped seeing, and she had done all of it without ever mentioning the one thing about herself that would have made most men in this valley stop reading after the first page. Waylon stood on the porch. His hands were at his sides. His coffee had gone cold on the railing beside him. His mind was a roaring blank, the kind of blank that happens when every assumption a person has been living inside collapses at once and the air rushes in to fill the space. The woman he had fallen in love with, the mind he had been conversing with for 2 years. The voice that had made his cabin feel less empty was standing at his gate with green skin and small tusks, and the uncertain expression of a person who has just placed every piece of themselves on a table and is waiting to see if the other person reaches for the pieces or walks away. "Hello, Waylon," she said. Her voice was low and warm and carried the accent of the northern holds. And it was exactly the voice he had imagined reading her letters in, except he had imagined it coming from a human face, and the distance between what he had imagined and what was standing at his gate was so vast he could not see the edges of it. They stood like that for a long time. She did not try to explain. She did not apologize. She did not make a speech about identity or prejudice or the unfairness of a world that judges people by their skin before it reads their words. She just stood at the gate, her amber eyes steady, her green hands still at her sides, and let him look. She had been looked at by humans her entire life. She knew what the looking meant and what it cost and how long it took and where it usually ended. Most of the time it ended with the door closing. She was not going to make it easier for him by talking. Either the letters mattered or they did not. Either the words were the woman or they were not. Either 2 years of truth was stronger than 10 seconds of surprise, or it was not. She had placed that bet the day she wrote the first letter, and she was standing at his gate collecting on it. And she would accept whatever currency he paid in, including silence, including the closing of a door. "I should go," she said quietly. She reached for her bag. "Wait," he said. She stopped. The word had come out before he was ready, but it was the right word, and he knew it the way he knew his own land, by feel, by the weight of it under his feet. "Just wait. I need a minute." She waited. He came down from the porch. He walked across the yard, slowly, the way you walk toward a thing you are still deciding about, but know in some deep part of yourself you have already decided. He stopped at the gate. Up close, she was taller than him by 2 inches. Her skin was the green of deep water. Her eyes held the same intelligence and warmth and quiet humor he had been reading for 2 years, and they looked exactly the way her words sounded, and that was the thing that broke through the noise in his head. Those were her eyes, the ones that saw sunlight on water and ice trying to write on a creek. Those were her hands, the ones that wrote the letters he had read until the paper wore thin. The woman who had written those letters was standing in front of him. and the only thing different about her was a thing he had never been told because she had wanted him to know her first. "You never told me," he said. "No, why?" "Because I wanted you to read my words without seeing my face. If I had told you what I was, you would have read every letter through that lens. Every beautiful sentence would have been a beautiful sentence written by an orc instead of just a beautiful sentence. And I wanted to be just a person to you, for as long as I could be. For 2 years." She nodded. "For 2 years I was just Senna, just a woman who writes about creeks and autumn and loneliness, and I wanted to stay that woman for as long as possible, because she is the best version of myself, and I was afraid she would disappear the moment you saw my face." He looked at her. The morning sun was behind her, and the light caught her dark hair and the ridge of her cheekbone and the amber of her eyes, and he thought about every letter stacked on his bedside table with the creases worn soft from reading, and every evening he had spent by the stove with her words in his hands and her voice in his head. And every sunset he had looked at harder and described more carefully because she was going to ask him about it, and he wanted to get it right. He thought about the ice on the creek trying to write something. He thought about the year putting on its best clothes before it dies. He thought about a woman who had shown him her entire mind and hidden only her face, and had been right to hide it, because if he had known, he might never have read past the first page, and that would have been the worst mistake of his life. "Come inside," he said. His voice was rough and his hands were not entirely steady, but the words were clear. He opened the gate. The hinges had not been oiled in a year, and they screamed, and the screaming sounded like the end of something old and the beginning of something new, which is what it was. She looked at the open gate, and her eyes went bright, and she picked up her bag and walked through. He poured coffee into the new cups he had bought, the ones without cracks, and she sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her green hands around the cup, and the cabin, that had been too quiet for 11 years, had a second person in it, and the second person was an orc, and the orc was Senna, and Senna was the woman who had taught him to look at the world again. And he was not going to let a thing as small as the color of her skin take that away from him. She stayed that first night in the spare room. He lay awake across the hall, listening to the cabin make its nighttime sounds, the settling boards and the wind and the stove ticking, and underneath all of it the sound of someone breathing in the room next door, someone real, someone who was no longer just handwriting on a page. He did not ask her to leave in the morning. She did not offer to go. The days that followed were strange and tender and full of the particular awkwardness of two people who know each other deeply in one way and not at all in another. She talked the way she wrote, in the same careful, beautiful sentences, and the sound of her voice saying things he had only ever read was like hearing a song he already knew performed for the first time live. She knew his land from his letters, and when she walked the fence line with him, she pointed at things he had described and said, "This is the bend in the creek where you saw the heron. This is the hill where the mist gathers. I have been here 1,000 times in my mind. Now I am here with my feet." One evening, sitting by the fire, she handed him a folded letter. He opened it. It was the last letter she had written, the one she had never sent. "Dear Waylon, by the time you read this, you will have seen my face. You will know what I am. I am an orc. I was born in the northern holds. I lost my family in the clan wars. I have green skin and amber eyes and small tusks that I used to be ashamed of and am not anymore. I did not tell you because I wanted you to know my mind before you judged my face. If you are still reading this letter, then the words mattered more than the skin. And if they did, then you already know everything important about me. Because the woman who wrote to you about sunlight and loneliness and the sound of wind through oaks is standing in your kitchen, and she looks different than you expected, and she is exactly who she said she was. Love, Senna. He set the letter down. He looked at her across the fire, her green face lit by the warm light, her amber eyes watching him the way they had watched him from the first word of the first letter, with intelligence and warmth and the particular courage of a woman who had decided to be known before she was seen. "I did not send it," she said, and her voice was steady in the way voices are when a person has practiced saying something difficult until the difficulty has been worn smooth. "Because I wanted you to decide without it. I wanted the decision to be yours, not because a letter told you how to feel, but because you looked at me, saw what I am, and chose. That was the only version of this that I could live with. A choice, not an instruction." He reached across the space between them, the space that had been 3 feet of air and 2 years of paper and one enormous secret, and took her green hand in his brown one. It was the first time they had touched. And her fingers were warm and strong and calloused from work and real in a way that 2 years of paper had never quite managed. And the letters on the bedside table were real. And the woman sitting across from him was real, and all three were the same person. The same mind, the same heart, the same particular way of seeing the world at a slight angle so that everything familiar looked new. And he had been in love with that person for 2 years, and the only thing that had changed was that now he could see her. And seeing her made the love not smaller but larger, because it had survived the one thing she had been most afraid of. "I am glad you came," he said. "I am glad you did not send that letter. Because you were right. I needed to decide for myself. And I am deciding now." She looked at him. And I am glad you stayed." She smiled. The smile broke open her whole face, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and he realized he was going to spend the rest of his life arguing with people in town about whether orcs could be beautiful, and he was going to win every argument, because he had 2 years of evidence stacked on his bedside table. And the evidence was written in the most beautiful handwriting he had ever seen, and it smelled faintly of herbs from the northern holds, and it was irrefutable. In the weeks that followed, the town formed its opinion, the way towns do, loudly and with confidence and very little information. But Wayland did not care about the town's opinion, because the town had not read Senna's letters, and the town did not know what it was like to fall in love with a person's mind and then discover that the rest of them was just as worth knowing. She replanted his mother's herb garden with seeds she had carried from the northern holds in a small leather pouch, the same herbs she had written about in her letters, the ones her own mother had grown before the wars. She organized his bookshelf by subject, the way she organized her thoughts, and she added her own books to his, and the two collections sat together on the same shelf the way their owners sat together by the same fire, different but compatible, each one better for the company. She described the sunset to him one evening from the porch, out loud, in the same careful, beautiful language she had used in 100 letters, except now the words were alive in the air between them instead of flat on a page, and the sound of her voice making the sky into sentences was the most intimate thing he had ever experienced. He told her so. She smiled, and the smile was new and uncertain and beautiful, and the cabin was not empty anymore. It smelled like herbs from the northern holds and fresh coffee and the particular warmth of a house that has 2 people in it instead of 1. It was never going to be empty again. He knew that the way he knew the land, not from thinking about it but from standing on it. And the standing was enough. And that was enough. If this story stayed with you, tell me one thing in the comments. When Senna walked up to the gate and he saw for the first time that she was an orc, what do you think went through his mind in those first 10 seconds? I read every comment. And if you want more tales from the Greywater country, subscribe, because the hearth here always keeps a cup for you.